Welcome to part 2 of our fantastic facts about the Spanish Armada. If you have missed our first part, a link will appear on screen now and will also be in the description below. Let's dive into part 2. Out of a starting fleet of about 90 to oppose the Spanish Armada, only about 30 of the English fleet were actual royal ships financed by the Crown. The others were private ships, armed merchants, and small flotillas paid for by merchant guilds. Obviously they sailed out to protect their country and their way of life, but many of these civilian crews, and including many of the commanders of the royal fleet, were out for what they could capture and pirate off the Spanish. It is a myth that the English ships were smaller than the Spanish. In many cases, the English ships were bigger and better armed. The Ark Royal was a mighty ship armed with 38 guns, including 4 60-pounders, 4 30-pounders, and 12 18-pounders. Martin Frobisher's ship, the Triumph, was a Leviathan of 1,100 tons, and would have dwarfed any of the Spanish ships. According to research by one of the finest Armada historians, Professor Geoffrey Parker, the way the Spanish measured weight in the 16th century could easily mean that many of their ships would be, in reality, a lot smaller and lighter than previously thought. Sir Francis Drake, the most famous sailor during the Spanish Armada, missed a large part of the campaign. During one of the early battles, the Spanish claimed to have shot the top off the mainmast of a great English flagship. Records later show that in the middle of the campaign, Drake's ship, the Revenge, was in port having urgent repairs being made due to her mainmast being riddled and decayed with shot. Many of the English fleet were the race-built galleon. Race does not mean fast, but came from the French raiser, to be lowered or cut down. The tall stern castles and forecastles of older ships had been lowered, so the gun deck could be lengthened. The race-built galleon was a concept by shipwright Matthew Baker, which gave a better underwater design, making them faster and easier to sail. Many Spanish sailors reported during the Armada that the English ships were much more manoeuvrable. Antonio de Venegas was a sailor aboard the Spanish flagship the San Martin. He writes, "The enemy did well because of the extreme nimbleness of their ships and the great smoke that came from their artillery." However, it is to be noted that a large proportion of the Spanish fleet were merchantmen, not designed for great manoeuvrability. And the Spanish kept their discipline and maintained Medina Sidonia's orders to keep a strong crescent formation, hence not needing extravagant manoeuvres. The lowering of the castles of a race-built galleon gave many benefits: more manoeuvrability, better handling, reduced wind resistance, a greater ratio of length to beam, more stable and weatherly, could sail closer to the wind, and allowed for a larger and more homogeneous battery of guns. The first ship to be given the new design of the race-built galleon was the wonderfully named Foresight. These new vessels were described as marvels of marine design, which could run circles around the clumsier Spanish competition. In June 1588, a ship from Cornwall called the Mousehole was on the way to France to collect a cargo of salt. On the 27th of July, the captain of the Mousehole saw the Spanish Armada. He decided to return to England to report what he had seen. He writes, "Being bound for France to collect salt, I encountered great ships between Scilly and Ushant. They were Spaniards. 3 of them gave chase, but I managed to escape. They were all great ships, and as I might judge, from 200 to 800 tons. The sails were all crossed with red crosses. The Spanish tactics relied on grappling after a single broadside. They had a huge advantage in the number of soldiers they had on board. The vast number of cannon the Spanish did have were not suited to naval combat, having very large wheels and extremely long trails. Their real purpose was knocking down city walls when they eventually landed in England. The royal ships that fought in the Armada campaign had aggressive, upbeat names. And as they were in the Armada campaign, which has been celebrated by the Royal Navy ever since, they have been used over and over again. For example, Dreadnought, Swiftsure, Vanguard, Triumph, Valiant, Tiger, Victory, Lion, and Ark Royal. Sir Francis Drake was a social revolutionary. He believed that noblemen should no longer be in command just because of their social position. He believed a captain should be an experienced sailor, and that all below should be equal. He had a famous saying, "The gentleman must haul and draw with the mariners, and the mariners should haul and draw with the gentlemen."